Welcome back, Whiskey Noobs. We have a ton of ground to cover in this episode. We're going to talk about aging. We're going to talk about some Q&As that you guys sent. We're going to touch briefly on the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So let's just get right into it. Before we start the episode, as always, I've got to mention, if you want to support the show, please consider checking out the Patreon at the link in the show notes. That's all the Patreon plug that you're going to get today because there is so much to talk about. So, as mentioned, today's episode is going to be about aging whiskey, some common myths that come about with aging whiskey. And it's funny, as I started writing them out, like a bunch just started coming to mind over and over again. So I wrote down everything that I thought of when I thought about aging, and I thought about either myths or even just misconceptions that I personally had about whiskey and what it meant for it to be aged and ways that it's aged, all those sorts of things. So I wrote down everything I could think of. We're going to talk about some of those. And we're also going to talk about how aging does affect the flavor of a whiskey. The real aging, not the myth type things that we're going to talk about. Before I do that, I want to quickly plug the Kentucky Bourbon Festival because it is coming up here it's a few months away. It's towards the end of the summer in September. I wanted to bring it up because I wanted to tell you that tickets had just gone on sale, but they actually sold out very quickly. So tickets are already sold out for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, but I highly recommend you go check it out and make a plan for next year if you're interested, because I genuinely love going to the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. I've gone 2 years in a row now. Super enjoyed it both times. There are a ton of distillers there. There's a ton of different whiskeys that you get to try, a ton of cool people that you get to meet. I can't plug it enough. I absolutely love going. I will always go as long as I am able to, and that's all that I have to say about the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So please go check it out at, I believe it's kybourbonfest.com. I should have been more prepared, but I think that's what it is. Let's look it up real quick. kybourbonfestival.com. The whole festival you got to put in there. So that's where you can go learn more about it. Go check it out. I'll probably put that link down below in the show notes as well. Very cool festival. I have fun every time that I go. I'd like to start going to more festivals like that, actually, but I had to make sure I shouted it out here. So, sorry the tickets are already sold out for this year, but that's your warning. I did not know they sold so quickly, to be totally honest. So, this is a wake-up call for me, and also I was recommending it to people, and the tickets had already sold out. So, just so you know, they sold out really quickly this year. So, be aware for next year, I suppose. Okay. Let's talk about aging your whiskey, and I'm actually going to be drinking, while we talk about this, I'm going to have some Buffalo Trace, but not normal Buffalo Trace. This is Buffalo Trace that I wrote on the label here. I wrote double oaked, and the reason that I wrote that on there is because I home double oaked this. I put it in an oak barrel, which we're going to see here in a little bit when I talk about it. And I aged this for, I believe it was 6 weeks. So it was just normal Buffalo Trace, put it in the barrel, aged it for about 6 weeks, and this is what came out of it. I'm going to be drinking it because we're going to talk about barrel aging. We're going to talk about some of the different home aging techniques. But before we do talk about those things, I want to talk about what happens during normal whiskey aging. This isn't just for bourbon. This is kind of a more general high-level look at whiskey aging. And so I actually went online and I went to smithsonianmag.com. I just looked up what happens while your whiskey is aging because I was sure there were details that I was going to miss, and I thought let's just get some more sciencey talk going on. I am going to be sprinkling in things that I just know about whiskey aging and things that you learn from experience. Sorry if you're watching the video version. I just swatted a piece of dust from out in front of my face. But I wanted to go to a website and actually, like I said, in case there's details that I was missing, and also get some of the science behind it a little bit. So, this is from smithsonianmag.com. First thing, I was like, this is really good that I decided to look this up and not just go off the cuff, because I wouldn't have even thought to mention this. Whiskey is clear until it is aged. I know that. A lot of you probably know that, but I didn't think about the fact that there's a lot of people who don't know that. I did not used to know that. When I was younger, I had no idea that whiskey didn't just come out of the still brown. I didn't even really know what a still was, but I assumed like whatever process you used to make whiskey, it just came out brown. It does not. So when whiskey is distilled, it comes out clear. You can picture moonshine if you've ever seen a jar of moonshine, not like the flavored stuff, but just moonshine. Or if you've seen, the show Moonshiners, they've got all these jars of just completely crystal clear liquid. That's what whiskey looks like. It's basically moonshine, or at least bourbon is basically moonshine before it's aged. All whiskeys are clear before they're aged. I'm glad I saw that on the Smithsonian Mag's website, because I was like, that's actually a really good point. The next thing you need to know is that they're aged in some sort of wooden container typically. This isn't always, but the vast majority of the time. And most major types of whiskey, bourbon, Scotch, Irish whiskey, they're going to require a wooden container. Some of them are going to have different rules as well. They're all going to have their own little rules to go with that. But aged in a wooden container. Sometimes you might see something aged or finished in a non-wooden container, but with wood in it. This is super uncommon. The only people that I am aware of that do it or did it, I think they still do it, is Broken Barrel. They take broken up barrels and they soak them in the whiskey in order to get all that flavor from the broken barrels. So, you got situations like that. But the vast majority of the time, traditionally speaking, you're putting whiskey into a container that looks like a barrel. There's different sizes of barrels. They could be called barrels, butts. There's all these different names. I actually used to know more of them off the top of my head. There's all these different names for them. Just picture a wooden barrel most of the time. So they're going to go into there, and the wood of those, before you put the whiskey in, the wood of those containers is usually charred or toasted. Usually it's got that black charred look to it going on the inside, and that's going to do a few things. It's going to impart some flavors into the whiskey, but let's get a little sciencey directly from SmithsonianMag.com. Through a chemical process called adsorption, so not absorption, but adsorption is at least how it's spelled, the molecules that make young whiskey so harsh are drawn into the barrel's wall, creating a thin layer of everything that you don't want to drink. And so, in other words, the charred surface of those barrels is basically filtering out some of those more harsh compounds. That charred surface, in part, is also going to put some of its own compounds into the whiskey. So there's going to be something like vanillin, which you've probably heard of. It's a very famous one that people talk about. Imagine what flavor vanillin gives to whiskey. It gives it that vanilla flavor. That's one of the compounds that's going to come out of the wood. You're also going to get lactones, which provide a buttery flavor, and tannins, which give it that dry, woody flavor. That's a really common note you'll hear people say, is this has a little bit of a tannic flavor to it. Usually that doesn't just imply woodiness, because sometimes woodiness can be sweet, but usually if you're talking about a tannic flavor, you're talking about that kind of bitterness that comes with it. So those are all different flavors that wood can impart into the whiskey. And at this point, you might be asking yourself, okay, the wood is filtering the whiskey, the wood is imparting flavors into the whiskey, but it's just like touching the whiskey. So how is it doing that? How is it filtering it if the whiskey's just kind of brushing the surface of it? Well, what actually happens, this isn't from the website anymore, this is just Chris talking. What actually happens is, as your whiskey is aging, when it heats up, everything kind of expands. The liquid, the air, it all expands. The wood opens up a little bit, and whiskey kind of goes into the barrel, almost like a really, really dense sponge. And then when everything cools down, that whiskey gets squeezed back out of the barrel because everything contracts, and the whiskey just goes back into like the ocean of whiskey in that barrel. So all happening within the barrel. It's going to go outward into the wood when it's hot, and it's going to go inward back into the whole, volume, the entire volume of liquid when it's cold. This is going to happen in cycles. Obviously, it can happen on small scales throughout the day as it gets hot and then it gets cold, but it's also, more importantly, going to happen throughout the seasons. A lot of warehouses or rick houses that you see are pretty much open to the environment. They don't have temperature control. They just allow the environment to heat up and to cool down the warehouse. There are also some warehouses that have temperature control in order to more controllably mimic the seasons and the days. So they'll actually purposefully heat up and cool down those warehouses. So it just depends on where you're at, but traditionally speaking, it was the weather that was doing this. Nowadays, of course, we can manipulate that a little bit. So that is the process by which you're going to have the whiskey kind of going into the wood and coming back out of the wood. And for that reason, you're going to get that interaction where you trade compounds. Some of them go to the wood, some of them come from the wood and into the whiskey. A couple things that are very important about this. First of all, it's clearly temperature dependent, as I mentioned, or climate dependent. Humidity is going to play a role. The entire climate surrounding that barrel, even just where it's at in the warehouse, because heat rises, right? So a lot of times, if you're going to pick something for an older whiskey, you're going to pick something from a lower level that just kind of slowly aged. If you're going to pick something for a newer whiskey and you want it to taste oaky relatively quick, you can pick something from that top level of the rickhouse because it's going to get the most hot and then cold and then hot and then cold. It's going to see the most interaction. And that amount of interaction that I just mentioned about young whiskeys and old whiskeys, we're going to get into when we talk about some of these myths about aging whiskey. So that is the general way that it works. Now, another thing that's very important to this is the surface area to volume ratio. There are different sizes of barrels that you can use, especially in different spirits. You'll use different sized barrels. And the size of the barrel is going to play a role in how quickly things get aged. Because if you have this giant barrel, you might think, wow, you have a lot of surface area. But actually, for that amount of surface area, you have a ton of volume. There's not really, sometimes you'll move your barrels around and stuff, but for the most part, there's not really anything mixing the whiskey within the barrel. So you can imagine it's going very slowly, like just the whiskey on the outer edge is getting that age, and then it's going to commingle by itself, but think of it almost like the way I picture it is like if you took a tea bag and you steeped it in hot tea and you didn't move it at all. It would like the tea would interact with the bag, but it would just kind of slowly diffuse through all the liquid. That's how it's happening with a barrel. So it's not being mixed up regularly, which means the amount of surface area actually touching that plays a huge role in how quickly it's going to age. So when you have this huge volume of whiskey and not too much surface area by comparison, that ratio is what's really important, then you're going to get slower aging, less interaction with the wood. When you have a smaller barrel, which has a lot more surface area compared to the amount of volume that it has, you're going to get faster aging, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about. In general, that is pretty much what's going on while your whiskey is aging. There's a lot of intricacies to it. There's different types of wood that you can use, obviously, different char levels. You can, instead of charring, you can toast. You can do lots of different things. But generally speaking, that's what's happening while a whiskey is aging. I'm going to grab one prop because I forgot to put it at my table, and that is the barrel that I used to age this here Buffalo Trace, if you're watching the video version. And I'm going to have a couple sips of my Buffalo Trace. We're going to talk about some myths. We're running through these myths in no particular order, to be totally honest with you. This is just the order that they came to me, basically. The first one, very important one, is a myth that the whiskey is going to age in the bottle. So as the whiskey, actually let me get this barrel out of the way that I just grabbed and look at a bottle. So the myth is that as the whiskey sits in the bottle, it's going to gain some character. It's going to get more, it's going to get smoother. It's going to gain more of these different flavor compounds. That's not going to happen in the bottle because most, as mentioned during the aging portion of this show, most of that aging is going to come from interaction with the barrel. Most of what you're looking for when you're talking about aging, the smoothness comes from the barrel pulling out those harsh compounds. The flavor comes from the barrel imparting those other compounds we talked about. So you're not really going to get aging in the bottle. Now, I'm not a wine connoisseur, but I know that people seem to think that it ages in the bottle. That could also be a myth for wine, which as I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, it's probably a myth for wine. But whether or not it's a myth for wine, my point is it's a myth for whiskey. So I always heard that about wine, that as it sits, the flavors are going to coagulate a little. Coagulate's probably not the right term. They're going to commingle a lot better, and it's going to really become this one kind of symphony of flavor instead of all these separate flavors. That's not really going to happen in the bottle for whiskey. It should be. As long as your bottle stays sealed, it's going to taste pretty much the same no matter what. I've never done an experiment to try it, but typically that is accepted to be the case. So whiskey's not going to age in a bottle. So if you buy a bottle and you sit on it for 20 years for a certain special occasion, it's not going to taste different than when you bought it, at least not by a lot. Big thing is, though, don't set it on its side if you're going to do that because it can eat away at the cork. Some people claim it doesn't. Some people claim it does. I'd like to be safe and not set a whiskey bottle on its side. With wine, you're supposed to set on its side so it keeps the cork wet. Another myth that kind of comes here from wine. But needless to say, or I guess to summarize that, whiskey's not going to age in the bottle. Now, the next thing you can just age in these mini barrels. Myth number 2. If you just buy one of these mini barrels and you buy Buffalo Trace White Dog, Buffalo Trace actually sells the, let's call it moonshine version before it's aged. If you buy one of these barrels, you fill it with White Dog, it's going to taste just like Buffalo Trace. That is not the case. First of all, a ton of factors play into it, as I mentioned: climate, location in the rick house, all those sorts of things. But secondly, as I mentioned, surface area is very important. So these little barrels, I'm holding up this barrel for those who are just listening to the audio version, but you can probably picture these mini barrels. You've probably seen them online. These mini barrels are not going to produce the same flavor or the same product as what you're going to get from the Buffalo Trace distillery. I'm using Buffalo Trace as an example because I'm holding it and I literally aged it at home, double oaked it at home. But it's not going to give you those same flavors that you would get from the distillery. The reason for that, as I mentioned, other than climate and all that, is not just the surface area. It's also the wood. It's also the char level. There's lots of different ways that you can char a barrel. You can prepare a barrel. You can make a barrel from different types of wood. A lot of times it's white oak, so if it's bourbon, it's just brand new charred oak barrels. But you can also use different types of oak, or where that oak even comes from. Some people go as far as to say every barrel's different because every oak tree that the barrel came from is different. I think that might be from that Neat documentary that I watched on Hulu not too long. Well, I guess it's kind of long ago now. But anyhow, I digress. The home aging barrel is not going to give you quite the same flavor. And for that reason, I have been drinking this here Buffalo Trace that I quote unquote double oaked at home in order to talk a little bit more about the flavor, because it's been a while since I drank it, so I wanted to get a fresh taste before I talk about what happened to the flavor. Let's talk about that though. So if you haven't figured out yet, or you haven't been listening for very long, I'm a fiend for double oak whiskey. I love oaky bourbons. I like Woodford double oaked, Old Forester 1910. Yeah, 1910. That's the double oaked one. I love double oaked whiskeys. The oakier, the better most of the time for me. So I thought, let's try, and I had heard about the surface area thing, but I thought it'd be a fun experiment. I thought, let's try double oaking Buffalo Trace. I love Buffalo Trace. I love double oaked whiskey. Let's make some double oaked Buffalo Trace. So I got myself one of these little barrels. I think this one's 1 liter. And I filled it with Buffalo Trace, and I checked in on it every week on Instagram. This was a while ago, but you can still find it. It's still up on my Instagram and on TikTok. And I checked up on it every week or every 2 weeks and waited until it continually got better and better and better. And then I waited until I saw it get a little worse, and then I pulled it out of the barrel. And that's because I knew at one point it was going to get worse. The downside was, between weeks 5 and 6, I felt like it got a lot worse, so I was a little sad about that. What essentially happened was it did start to taste oakier. You got a lot more cinnamon flavor, vanilla flavor, some brown sugar flavor. It almost has more of like a candied nut taste to it now. But the downside is those tannins, okay? So it also got bitter as it was gaining those flavors. At about week 5, it was like, okay, this is more bitter for sure, but it has so much more of that flavor that for me personally, this is like fantastic. Once I got to week 6, that flipped. And I thought maybe, I didn't know how long it was going to take, so my hope was week 6, you get even more flavor and even more bitter. But what actually happened was by week 6, it got more bitter and less flavor. So if you taste this, which I have been doing as I've been talking here, you're going to notice there's a lot more of what kind of gets you on the sides of your tongue, kind of on your jaw, where your jaw kind of feels tingly. That kind of bitterness, especially that kind of stays on your tongue after you swallow it. There's a lot more of that, but there's also a lot more character from the barrel. There's a lot more, I kind of mentioned, like that candied nut flavor. There's a distinct flavor that you get when you have something aged in a smaller barrel or aged in a rapid aging sort of technique where they have either smaller barrels or they raise the temperature, lower temperature, raise the temperature, lower temperature. Anything like that where you're really trying to quickly age something, there's a distinct flavor that you notice, and if you try the double oaking at home, you'll taste it, you'll know what I see. I try to describe it my best. It's bitterness plus cinnamon, basically, if I had to really, really generalize it. So you can't just put them in smaller barrels in order to age them at home and in order to age them quicker. So 2 things that are important. First of all, you can't just age them in small barrels the same way they're aged at the distillery. Thinking if I leave Buffalo Trace White Dog in a barrel for 10 years, Eagle Rare is aged for 10 years, it's going to taste like Eagle Rare. No, it will not. It'll taste extremely oaky, most likely. But also, if you think, well, I'm just going to fast age it and then it's going to taste like Eagle Rare. Also, no, because of the surface area difference, it's just something is different with that type of aging technique. So it's not just as simple as it ages faster in the smaller barrel. It also just doesn't quite do the same thing. There's just something that the time does to it that you can't mimic, the time and the climate and all of those things. Another thing that I actually wanted to mention earlier and I forgot that plays some role in this, right, is every year you lose some whiskey due to evaporation. The barrels aren't like physically leaking. Sometimes they do, but hopefully not. In the vast majority of cases, they're not leaking, but there is some evaporation that happens. Some of that whiskey kind of sneaks out through the wood, and you actually lose a good amount of whiskey every single year due to aging. And that right there shows you that you're doing something fundamentally different when you do it at home and you don't really lose any to evaporation because you do it so quickly. It's not getting as strong as the other whiskeys are going to get. A lot of times your whiskey's going to age. You're going to lose some of the Angel's share. It's going to get stronger, and then you're going to proof it down when you go to put it in a bottle. A lot of times. That's why cask strength is a thing. That's also why full proof is a thing. So like Weller full proof, they put it in the barrels at 114, and then it gets hotter and hotter and hotter because of the Angel's share. It gets stronger, and then they proof it back to 114. That's what full proof means in terms of Weller full proof. So all of that, long story short, is aging in these little barrels is not going to do the same thing as aging in a big barrel over a long period of time. Now, another kind of quick trick a lot of people try to do is those aging spirals. Now, those are going to have a similar impact. I have used the aging spirals a couple of times, and they're going to have a similar impact where it's going to taste like a speedily aged thing. It's not going to taste the same as if it was just aged slowly over time. So they're going to do that, but a really common myth with them is that they're going to make cheap whiskey taste more expensive, or even these little barrels will, but especially the aging spirals. There's a TikTok that went insanely viral at one point about them, saying that it's going to make them taste super expensive, make them taste like a more expensive whiskey. That is not the case. It might, right? Like anything might. You might add water to it and now it tastes like a more expensive whiskey. Anything could make a whiskey taste more expensive if it's the right whiskey, the right spiral, the right circumstances, aged for the right amount of time. But in general, it's not like they're this magic trick that makes whiskey taste more expensive. Sometimes it's going to make it taste more bitter and tannic. Sometimes with the right whiskey, I'm not trying to say the person who made that TikTok was wrong. I don't even know who made it at this point. I just remember it a long time ago. I'm not trying to say they were wrong. I'm just saying that maybe for that specific whiskey, to them, it made it taste more expensive. That could be the case. But it's not this magic bolt that's going to make everything taste phenomenal like a 20-year-old whiskey or something like that. Which actually is an excellent segue into my next myth. The next myth is that older is better. The older the whiskey, the better, man. You got to get that expensive age statement, and the older it gets, the more expensive it gets, but it's worth paying for because older is better. That is a myth. I'm saying those things sarcastically. Honestly, with bourbon, there is a real, I don't want to say obvious because not everybody agrees with me, but kind of an obvious tipping point. It's different for every bourbon because if it's aged, once again, in a colder climate, warmer climate, all those things affect it. But there is a tipping point. You'll have some bourbons where the older they get, the more you're like, oh boy, like this just tastes bitter and tannic. I noticed this happens less with Scotch, or at least Scotch, you tend to be able to get it older without it getting those harsh tannic flavors to it. Differences in how the compounds are going to interact with the barrels. Scotch is usually made from malted barley. Bourbon's usually made mostly with corn. You're going to get different interactions with the barrels. Also, as Scotch whiskeys, Irish whiskeys, those sorts of whiskeys, a lot of times they're going to use used barrels, which have already had something in them, and so already some of that charred tannic flavor has left the barrel, so you can kind of age it slowly and progress it more slowly so you can get it older without having that problem. But in general, older is not always better. Older is almost always more expensive, and that is because it's more expensive to produce. As I mentioned, you lose a little bit every year. So by its very nature, it's more expensive because you have less of it in stock. It's also more expensive because by its very nature, you have to own property to store it on for a longer period of time. If you add up all of your property taxes and if you're paying it off from your loan over 20 years, it's a lot more than adding it up over 10 years and then getting new whiskey onto that same exact property and then starting all over again. So by its very nature, older is more expensive. It is not necessarily better tasting, and that's an important one to keep in mind. Another myth is that darker means older. Not always. Sometimes, especially this can be very common with bourbon, because bourbon you're not allowed to add any type of coloring to it, but there are lots of types of whiskeys where you're actually allowed to add caramel coloring to the whiskey. So it could be young and you could add coloring to it to make it look darker. I'm not saying that happens super duper often, but it's allowed. Another reason that that's not necessarily the case is because of all the double oaking and triple oaking that happens nowadays. It might not be older. It might actually just have been taken out of one barrel and put into another barrel for a short period of time, taken out of that second barrel and put into a third barrel for a short period of time. And then it's getting like 3 new barrels back to back. Not everybody does that. I'm thinking specifically of High Bank's Whiskey War Double Double. So they do exactly that. They take it out of their barrel, they put it into another oak barrel that's brand new, and so it gets all those oaky flavors times 2. And they take it out of there and they put it in another barrel that's brand new, so it gets all those oaky flavors. In this case, I think High Bank Double Double specifically turns out phenomenal. I love High Bank's Double Double, but I'm just saying that doesn't necessarily mean it's older. It could just mean it was processed differently. It could also just be that it's stronger. You could have a super duper old whiskey that you water all the way down to 80 proof. Maybe it came out of the barrel at 140. You water it down to 80, it's going to look a lot lighter. So the color, the tint of the whiskey doesn't necessarily mean age. It can in some circumstances, but doesn't always. So then I want to stop at something that I don't know if it's a myth or not. I want to kind of wrap up our whiskey myths and our home aging with this, because I've heard about it. I've never tried it, but I want to throw it out there in case anybody out there wants to try it. I personally am going to ask for one of these for my birthday because I would like to try it. There is a thing out there called Fusion Barrel Works. This is the only one that I could find. There might be more brands out there, so if there are, feel free to comment it or shoot me an email, DM me, whatever. Especially if you're on the Patreon, shoot me a message and let me know if you know of other brands that do this. The basic idea is it is an aging vessel that is mostly stainless steel, but it has some charred oak. Especially, I think, on Fusion Barrel Works, I think it's just the cap is charred oak, and that cap gives you about the same surface area as being in a larger barrel. So the idea is, if you picture this mini barrel that I have, if you're watching the video, if you took the whole mini barrel and you made all of it metal, the metal's not really, it shouldn't, hopefully, interact with the whiskey at all. But then you put a wood cap on it. That wood's going to interact with the whiskey. The idea is you're getting that same amount of interaction that you would get with an older barrel, or with a full-size barrel that you'd be able to age it older and get less interaction, and so you can age more slowly. The idea being you'd get something much more similar to what you would get in a normal-size barrel. Does it work? I have no idea. I'm a bit skeptical about having any type of metal be in contact with the whiskey, especially since this, I would think you'd want to do this for a long time. I would think like you would want to take a normal or a white dog, let's say, and age it for 5 to 10 years. Well, if you're going to do that, I'm a little skeptical about interacting with that metal. But I don't know, and I would love to try it. So I might be trying it, but I wanted to let you guys know. I also stole this blurb from their website. So once again, this is from Fusion Barrel Works. And it says, "What sets our barrel apart is the importance we place on aging and weathering the wooden staves. Over time, the aging process removes the tannins from the wood, preventing them from imparting into your spirits. The barrel is also designed to resemble the surface area to liquid ratio of larger barrels used by distilleries, breweries, and vineyards, ensuring that your aged liquid doesn't have an overly oaked taste like the other small barrels on the market." I totally agree with them about what happens with small barrels, but I don't know if their thing works or not. I have zero affiliation with them. I just heard about it and I was like, that would be really good to include in this episode. So it might be fun for you to try. If you're interested, go check them out. And if there's any other brands that do it, especially if they do it cheaper, let me know. I'm all about getting the more budget stuff. In summary, the last thing that I want to say to kind of just bring all of this together, the big thing I want you to take away from this, the age that is listed on the bottle means a whole lot more than what you're going to do after you buy the bottle. Or to put it more specifically, the age that is listed on the bottle is going to determine the flavor that the distiller was shooting for. And that's going to be really, really hard to mimic at home. It's going to be hard to buy a 5-year whiskey and make it taste like a 10-year whiskey. It's going to be hard to buy a double oaked bourbon and or buy a single oaked bourbon and make it taste like a double oaked bourbon. Those sorts of things are going to be hard to do. What you buy at the store is much more likely to give you the taste that it is that you're looking for. That's not to say there's not value in all these other things. So I listed them off as myths, which has like a negative connotation. That being said, the trial run that I did with this barrel was a ton of fun. I actually really enjoyed it. I still really like the Buffalo Trace. It's a little more bitter than I would have liked, but if I had pulled it out at 4 or 5 weeks, I think it would have been fantastic. So it doesn't taste like double oak Buffalo Trace would probably taste from a distillery. Doesn't exist, but if it did, it doesn't taste like that. But it does taste different, and it's interesting, and it's fun. So by all means, feel free to do that. Also, I did age tequila in the barrel after I pulled the bourbon out, and I thought that tasted phenomenal as well. So there's still validity to this. There's still validity to those oak spirals. There's still validity to all those things. But the big message I wanted to get across is it's not going to taste like it's from a distiller. It's going to taste noticeably different. So you're not going to be able to mimic that at home, except maybe these Fusion Barrel Works things. I don't know. I'd like to try them. Let's dive into the Q&A section of the episode, though. So these questions do come to us from our patrons. So thank you so much to everybody who asked a question this month. Thank you for supporting me on the Patreon page. I can't tell you enough how much of a difference it makes for this podcast, how much it means to me to have your guys' support. It's huge. I can't put it into words. I think someday I'd like to have a much more transparent, just peel the curtain back podcast and explain to you all the ways that's getting used. But for now, let me just say thank you so much. So these questions do come from our patrons, and I meant to think about them, but I didn't. So we're going to think through them on the fly here. Question number 1, what's a bottle that you haven't had, but you wish you could try? I think an obvious one for anybody is like the Pappy lineup. I've only ever had Old Rip Van Winkle, so that one is a semi-obvious one. There was another. I'm going to take a sip of my Buffalo Trace while I think about it here, because I'm pretty sure there was another one that I was thinking about. There was an Old Fitzgerald release this past year. I want to say it was VVS, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. It was an Old Fitzgerald release that everybody was cuckoo about. I wish I would have been able to try that one. But there's not much. I don't spend a lot of time, to be honest with you, like super worried about finding those rare bottles or trying those rare bottles. I would love to, and when I get the opportunity to, if it shows up at a friend's house or at a bar, I absolutely do. So like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I don't care about rare bottles. I am saying I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about them, because there is, and this is like a message I've been trying to hammer home lately, there is so much delicious whiskey on the market that is readily available that you don't really have to worry about those rare things. Now, the rare things are fun, and I enjoy them, and I'll still stand in line when I have the opportunity to, but they don't take up a significant portion of brain space for me. Most of the brain space goes to trying the things that are available, because they're available, so that's awesome, especially the craft guys. But yeah, I think those ones, I think the Pappy lineup, definitely BTAC. I think if I had to pick a BTAC specifically, I'd do George T. Stagg, because I've had Stagg Jr. and I really enjoy Stagg Jr. So I'd probably pick George T. Stagg out of the BTAC lineup. BTAC, if you're newer to the show and you don't know what that is, that's the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, BTAC, and a lot of people just say BTAC. So yeah, if I had to pick something out of that lineup, that's probably what I would pick. But of course, Pappy. Pappy's a great example of older is not always better, because I have heard a lot of people say 15 year, 18 years, kind of the sweet spot. I think they have a 20 and a 23. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. For sure, they got a 23. They say those are sometimes considered too old. So That's a great example of older is not always better. This next question, what is the most interesting finish you've tried? Are there any really unique finish ideas you would like to see? And then this person says, my favorites have been Old Line Stout Cask, Sagamore Mead Cask, and High West Chardonnay Cask. Those are all very unique. The most interesting finish that I've tried, oh man, I gotta remember what it was. It was from Barrel. It was a limited release that they did. And I think it was an Amaro cask. I believe it was Amaro. And it had this super cool sarsaparilla or like really fresh fountain beverage of Coke. Like, you know, when the fountain's brand new and it's real syrupy. It had that flavor to it. It was so cool. So that was probably the most interesting that comes to mind. I've had a lot of interesting ones. I think Penelope Havana is a phenomenal finish. It's a mix of maple and rum finishes, and I think that's fantastic. I think Barrel, once again, the Tale of Two Islands was really interesting. So they took a barrel that once held bourbon and aged... No, wait. I think they took a peated Scotch barrel, a barrel that aged peated Scotch, and then put rum in it and aged the rum, and then put bourbon in it and aged the bourbon. I think it's something crazy like that. And it was cool. Like, you could taste there was something going on with that flavor profile. Just a little bit of that peatiness came through, but rum is like a totally different flavor. I thought that was very cool. Other interesting finishes. Now I need to just look over at my wall here. You mentioned the Old Line Stout Cask, which I have not had, but I do have an Old Line Sherry Cask right now that is fantastic. So that's another interesting one. Yeah, those are all that come to mind at the moment. I've had some loony ones that I wasn't too big of a fan of, but I can't think of any others that really, really stand out. You know what? I'll throw a shout out in there because it's not finished. Well, there is a finished version of it. There's a few different Bactas that I've had, and I forget which two I've had. Let me look them up real quick. Bacta. So Bacta has a few different ones that I like. 1928 from Bacta is mixed with Armagnac, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not just finished, it's actually got some blended into it. But that's a super, if you like finished stuff, and you like that kind of flavor that it has, it's a rye whiskey that has that Armagnac mixed into it. And then there's another Bacta that I'm going to struggle to find that was just finished with Armagnac. Enter without adding my email in, please. That was just finished in an Armagnac cask, and that was really good. Single vintage spirits. Let's look. 2013 straight rye whiskey, I believe, is the one that is finished in Armagnac casks, and that is also fantastic. So I like those. Those are super weird and interesting. I'm a really big fan of those. Okay, moving on to our last question here. What bourbon do you enjoy that not many people go crazy for? The one that came to mind immediately when I thought of this was, oh my goodness, Redwood Empire Pipe Dream. Now, it is popular, and a lot of people like it, and a lot of people say in my comments that they like it. But I do feel like I love it. For some reason, like more than most people, I just love it. It's just right in my wheelhouse. It is right on my flavor profile. I think it is phenomenal. So that is the one that first came to mind. I'm kind of looking at my stuff here. I feel like I like Knob Creek more than a lot of people, especially just the standard Knob Creek 9-year. I love it. I think it's fantastic. Knob Creek 12-year, even more so. I don't see it get talked about a lot for being something that's just on the shelf, so I'm very surprised that I don't see more about it. Did you say bourbon specifically? You did say bourbon specifically. Okay. What else? I'm trying to find something that like people don't actually talk about that's like just a me thing. Here's a specific one you don't hear about a lot. Filmland Spirits Moonlight Mayhem Extended Cut. When I tried Filmland Spirits for the first time, I loved it. I thought it was great. And then but I didn't think too much of it. I just thought this was a really good bourbon. And then they sent us a bottle for Perfect Pairing podcast. And we had multiple episodes where we used it. And I found myself just falling in love with it. It goes great with cigars. It's got a ton of flavor. I thought it was really good. So Filmland Spirits Moonlight Mayhem Extended Cut, which is the cask strength version of it, I think is fantastic. So that's one that I feel like you don't hear about too much that I really enjoy. And then this one's a little tough because I don't think they ship quite everywhere. But Watershed's Bourbon, specifically their cask strength ones, the barrel picks, those are usually really, really good. Big fan of them. Plus, they're right in my backyard here, being an Ohio distiller, so I like to shout them out. Yeah, I think those are the main ones, though. Those are the biggest ones that I can think of that I'm like crazy for, and I don't hear people go crazy for. Oh, another Ohio distiller I got to shout out. Middle West Spirits, their wheated bourbon. I love it. It kills it in my blind tastings. That's another one that I'm just like, I don't know why people aren't talking about this more. I think it's just because they're more craft. They're not super widely distributed. But as they gain that distribution, I think they're going to gain some hype behind them as well. Okay, I just ended up giving a ton of examples. I meant to give one. So there you go. You got more than you bargained for with that question. That's all I've got. Those questions are all I've got. So hopefully you learned something interesting about aging during this episode, and also busted some myths. And I don't want to, with busting the myths, I don't want to stop anybody from enjoying those things. I do still think they're phenomenal. They're enjoyable. There's something of merit to all these aging techniques. I will still probably use mini barrels. I'll still probably try out some more spiral stuff. But I just wanted to let you know that some of those more common myths will lead you to think you're going to get something phenomenal, and maybe you're not. So keep that in mind. Still enjoy them. Drink the whiskey however you darn well please. If you like it in a mini barrel aged super tannic for a year, then do it. I don't care. That's awesome. Enjoy it the way that you want to enjoy it. Thank you all for listening. I will leave you with learn to drink, drink to learn. Hi there. If you're still listening to this, then I'm going to assume that you enjoyed the show. So please consider taking a moment to leave a 5-star rating or review and subscribe on whatever platform it is that you're watching/listening to this on. And as always, please, please, please drink responsibly. Cheers.